We can't predict the future. That's a pretty easy thing to understand. We know that. But the reality is we really can't predict the future. If you had told me as a kid that I would have something like this, a little box that functions as a phone, as a TV, as a compass, as a flashlight, as a computer, as a video recorder, as an audio recorder, as the way that I listen to radio programs, essentially, which are podcasts, as a way that I connect with people, video conferencing, I would have told you that you were off your rocker. I would not have believed that that was the case. On the other hand, I was so sure that we would have flying cars, and I'm now so sure that we will never have flying cars. That's a shattered dream of my childhood. But the bottom line is we really can't predict the future. That's pretty obvious. And that's important because we often talk about what students will need in the future. But the reality is the future is uncertain. I'm going to give an example of this to show just how bad we are at predicting the future. In 1984, Philip Tetlock did a study where he asked experts in every single field to predict global events. Now, these were more like geopolitical events, but you get the idea. They were making big predictions about the future. And then he compared those to certain people who were just regular. They didn't have any expertise in their fields. They didn't necessarily have better access to information. And he wanted to see how those compared to the experts. And what he found is that the experts were awful at predicting the future. He describes it basically as saying you would have had a better option having a monkey throwing darts at a dartboard because the experts were really bad at their predictions. By contrast, if you look at the way that the non-experts were, there were a certain group of people who actually performed really well at making predictions in the future. He called these people super forecasters. They were really good at predicting the future. Now, later on, his team, along with his wife, Barbara Mellers, they entered a big competition to see, again, who predicts the future the best, and their team overwhelmingly won. And they basically used, again, these super forecasters to be able to figure out what was going to happen in the future. Now, who were these super forecasters? They weren't big, top-notch experts. They didn't have access to classified information. They weren't any of what you would have predicted. These were people who were essentially everyday Joes or Janes. They were people who had the same kind of access to knowledge that you and I have. But there was something about them that made them different. They were people who sought out multiple opinions. They were far less ideological, and they were open to constantly hearing new ideas and new opinions. They loved to look at information from multiple angles. They loved to see the diversity of the perspectives and to use that to basically curate what they found to be most important. They were people with a high level of numeracy. They had a great sense of how stats worked, and they really understood numbers. They were divergent thinkers. They were willing to think outside the box and question conventional wisdom to come up with their own predictions. They were connective thinkers, and not only connective thinkers, they were people who were well-read in multiple different genres. They didn't stick to one area of expertise. They were all over the place in terms of what they read and what they listened to. And because of that, they were constantly making connections between different ideas. They were intellectually curious. They were always asking questions. They basically, you know how toddlers are always asking why? These were the people that never stopped doing that. They were people who treated their predictions like experiments, and they were willing to look at the new data and say, I was wrong, and then come up with a new one. In other words, they were iterative thinkers. They were people with diverse interests, not just a diverse knowledge set, not just well-read in different things, but they tended to be just fascinated by everything. They were consumed with a sense of wonder. And finally, and this has already been alluded to, They were intellectually humble. They were quick to own their mistakes and to change their predictions based on that. Whereas the experts tended to be narrow, they were broader. While the experts tended to dig in their heels and say, I was right, or that can't be true, they basically said, look, I was wrong, and let's modify our predictions. So what does this mean? I bring this up because if our students inhabit a tumultuous world, a world of constant change, they're going to need to be these things. They're going to need to be intellectually humble. They're going to need to be diverse in their interests. They're going to need to be curators who can figure things out. They're going to need to be all of those things. In other words, they're going to need to have the soft skills that will be needed in the future. And I would argue that those soft skills are timeless. They've always been relevant and they always will. And that is the core idea at the heart of something called vintage innovation. The following video is a short explanation of what vintage innovation is and how it works. Our world is changing. Machine learning is transforming manufacturing. Virtual reality and augmented reality are just beginning to reshape how we view the world. We can't predict what the future will hold with things like artificial intelligence and nanotechnology. Now, in many cases, schools have responded with a push to prepare students for the future. Get more 3D printers and cutting-edge devices. Make sure every student learns how to code. But the future is complex and unpredictable. Here's where vintage innovation comes in. Vintage innovation is a shift away from the flashy and new and over to different and better. It's the counterintuitive idea that the best way to prepare students for the future is by empowering them in the present. Our students need to develop the soft skills that machines lack, like collaboration and empathy. In a world of constant change, our students need to be divergent thinkers. In an era of automation, our students might just need lo-fi tools. In a world of artificial intelligence, our students need to think philosophically. In a sea of instant information, our students need to slow down, to be critical thinkers and curators. Vintage innovation is not a nostalgic call for the good old days, nor is it a reactionary rejection of all things tech-related. Instead, it's a both-and mindset. It's the overlap of the tried and true and the never tried. It's a mashup of cutting-edge tech and old-school tools. It's the overlap of timeless skills in new contexts. Vintage innovation is what happens when engineers use origami to design new spacecraft, and robotics engineers are studying nature for innovative designs. And as a teacher, it's what happens when you do sketchnote videos, mashing up hand-drawn sketches with digital tools, or blend Socratic seminars with podcasting. It's that service learning project that combines the deeply human hands-on learning with photojournalism. It's the old idea of commonplace books to explore new, relevant research. It's a design project that includes duct tape and cardboard and sticky notes and markers, but also digital modeling. With vintage innovation, teachers ask, how do I innovate when I don't have the newest technology or the fanciest gadgets? How can I use constraints to spark creativity? How can I use vintage tools, ideas, and approaches in new ways? How do I blend together the tried and true and the never tried? If you are a teacher, you are an innovator. You're an experimenter trying new things. You're the architect designing new learning opportunities. Apps change, gadgets break, technology grows obsolete, but one thing remains: teachers change the world. So with that in mind, the biggest idea is this: teachers are at the heart of innovation. And when you take on this vintage innovation mindset, you often prepare students for things that are timeless rather than things that are necessary right now. In other words, by empowering students in the present, you prepare them for the future. We often talk about what it means to move from compliance to engagement. It's the idea of creating an environment where students want to learn rather than have to learn. But if we want students to be creative, self-directed learners, we need to move beyond student engagement and into empowerment. But this requires some paradigm shifts. That's right, we are going to be talking shift. Here's what I mean. The empowered classroom is a shift from giving choices to inspiring possibilities. It's a shift from making the subject interesting into tapping into the student interest. When you go from saying you must learn this to asking, what do you want to learn? It's a shift from taking assessments to assessing your own learning. An iterative process full of mistakes that ultimately lead to success. It's a shift from the teacher asking all the questions to the students asking their own questions, where they chase the inquiry process and take learning off-road. It's a shift from uncritical consuming to critical consuming and creating. Here students move from critical consuming to inspiration to creativity, where they use the design process to launch their work to the world. It's a shift from differentiating instruction to personalizing learning. And it's a shift from rigid to adjustable systems so that students own the process. They can set their own pace, choose their own formats, and decide what resources they want to use to accomplish their goals. It's a shift in mindset from compliance to self-direction. In other words, it's a shift towards student ownership. And when that happens, our students become the creative, critical thinkers who change the world. The heart of innovation is the teacher. You are the architect creating new learning experiences. You are the experimenter. You are the one who is intellectually humble. You are the designer, the problem solver. You know how to do iterative thinking. And when you model that for students, you prepare them for a world that is entirely unknown.